Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Bonjour et bienvenue. My name is Alex Gates, and I am the Executive Director and Curator of the Canadian Automotive Museum in Oshawa, Ontario, in Canada, of course. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon as we continue to explore Canada's automotive history. So, particularly if you're on March break, I appreciate you joining in. Today we have more than 50 participants who have registered from across Canada and the UK, and I think from the US as well. So I'm glad to see many returning viewers, but many new viewers as well joining us for the first time for this talk. It's always good to have people join us. We've had many of these talks over the last couple of years. This is a COVID initiative that we've done to reach out to a wider audience, and we've been doing this since December 2020. So thank you for joining us. To begin with, let me cover a few technical details. We are using the Zoom webinar platform. So as a participant, you are able to see us and the presentation, but on your end, all of your cameras and sound are off. So you can sit back and relax this afternoon. Dumeric Depensier, our Exhibitions and Special Projects Coordinator, he's going to be monitoring the Q&A this afternoon, and we're going to cover as many questions as possible following Chris's talk. If there's something we aren't able to get to, we can certainly follow up with you after the talk with the email address you used to register. So throw out as many questions as you want. We are recording this talk, and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel next week, and a link will be available in our upcoming, April newsletter. So following this talk, you're also going to receive a link to a survey. Your feedback is, of course, always appreciated. Our third Thursday Zoom talks continue at their regular time at 7 p.m. Eastern. On April 20th, we're going to have John Kastner from the Stratford Perth Museum. He's going to be speaking on the local impact of the Brooks steam car. The Brooks was Canada's only commercially produced steam car, and it's one of the most scandalous cars we have in our collection. So mark your Canada, because it's a wild ride, full of hot air, as we like to say, but also a unique Canadian story and another vehicle that we have on display in our collection. Finally, thank you to our national media sponsor, the History Channel, for helping promote our 2023 events, and to Hagerty for being our sponsor for the third Thursday series once again here in 2023. And of course, thank you to everyone who became a member or made a donation as part of your registration today. We really appreciate that, and we hope to see you at other events. This afternoon, we are joined by Chris Marsh, who is joining us from England, just west of London. Chris, as a displaced Canadian living in the UK for the past 30 years, has traveled across the world tracking the story of the Can-Am while meeting a wide variety of fans who still compete on the bikes and keep the story alive. For the past 25 years, through his website, cannedham.com, yes, canned ham, with a hyphen there in the middle, Chris has championed the Can-Am story as being a little told tale of an incredibly successful Canadian story. Chris has been helping us with research on our Can-Am that we have in our collection as we've been redoing our interpretive panels. So we greatly appreciate all of his help he's provided. And there's enough material that we thought we should do a whole talk on this subject because we couldn't certainly fit it in 150 words in our gallery. So Chris, thank you so much for joining. Thanks so much for working with us with the logistics to welcome you virtually to the Canadian Automotive Museum this afternoon. And I will turn it over to you because we have an exciting story to hear.
Right, well, thank you, Alex, and for the Canadian Automotive Museum for inviting me today. The reason for the talk is for the motorcycle that you see on the screen. This comes from the museum's collection, and it's a lovely little TNT Can-Am motorcycle. And this is typical of what people think when they hear the word of Can-Am, the traditional motorcycles that were made in the 1970s. The story of Can-Am is really a Canadian story. It was obviously designed and built in Canada, and it's the only motorcycle to ever achieve a true commercial production. There was the Alouette, which was another motorcycle made in the early 1970s in Montreal by the Alouette Corporation. But they only really produced about 350 bikes, so they never really made it into true commercial production over a number of years. And prior to that, the only other real motorcycle companies that existed in Canada, basically pre-World War II, was about 30 odd companies, but most of them never got beyond the prototype or very small production of just 2 or 3 units. This is who I am. Alex, as Alex introduced me, my name's Chris Marsh. And for the last 20 odd years, I've operated the website cannedham.com, which is dedicated to preserving the history of Can-Am motorcycles that were made during the 70s and 80s, mainly to help people keep them running and to help keep the Canadian story about their design and production alive. It's fair to say that when I started the website, I started it more as a blog about my bikes. I'm a Canadian. I grew up around the Orangeville area, but for the last 30 years, I've worked in the UK. My job is in the oil industry, and I've lived over here for about 30 years. And it's fair to say I met very few people in the UK who actually knew the story about Can-Am. Very, very hard to find any bikes. So when I started fooling around with the bikes, I launched the website really just to find other people in the UK who were actually interested about the bikes. And it's fair to say the website has grown from there. I remember when we first launched the website, I think we launched it on a Tuesday. And within a week, I started to receive emails from people all over the world telling me about their bikes and saying, oh, you know, it's great to finally read something on the internet about Can-Ams. And from there, it's grown. As I said, my job until I retired a couple of years ago was in the oil industry, and that allowed me to travel all over the world, meeting people about Can-Ams. I've met, you know, most of the people in the original design team, met, you know, original factory riders, been to all sorts of events from classic dirt bike in Australia to Arbor Festival, Mid-Ohio, and those kinds of events and other ones here in the UK and in Europe. That's allowed me to gather the information and to meet the people to talk about it. My collection is quite large. I did at one time have about 30 odd Can-Ams in my collection. And over the last 20 years, I've owned most models and capacities of the bikes. But now my collection has been considerably reduced. However, I still maintain my collection of memorabilia. Some of it is behind me, and I can assure you my whole house is full of it, from a complete collection of the original clothing, all of the technical information that was produced, manuals, got boxes and boxes of original company papers, and even behind me you can see I have a couple of prototype alloy fuel tanks. And down in my workshop, I have 3 Can-Ams, which I still maintain and compete in vintage enduro events. So that's about me. Our talk tonight is about the early days of Can-Am and what I believe is quite an incredible story, which kicks off in about 1970, with production starting in 1973. Hence, we are in the 50th anniversary year of Can-Am, and therefore there are a number of unique events going on. I'll explain that later. As I tell the story about Can-Am, I just want to clarify that back when the bikes were originally produced, they were produced by the Bombardier Corporation in Valcourt, Quebec. And in 2003, that corporation split into two entities, one maintaining the name Bombardier and basically concentrates on heavy transportation, trains and all that. And then the leisure side of the business became Bombardier Recreational Products, or BRP, and they are the people that still produce under the Can-Am name, such as the three-wheeled Spyders and the ATVs that they now do. I have a great relationship with BRP. I've had the distinct pleasure of addressing their senior management on a couple of times to help them understand the actual history of their corporation. But it's fair to say that I am not connected with Bombardier or BRP in any way whatsoever. And any of the views and opinions that I express in this talk tonight are my own and nothing to do with BRP. But the story is a fantastic one, and you know, as I said before, it all kicks off in about 1970. So how does the story begin? Well, it starts with the man on the left-hand side of this picture, Laurent Baudin, who at that time was given the task to come up with a product which would help maintain the snowmobile factory during the winter months when they were not making snowmobiles, so working 6 months ahead of schedule, and they needed something else to make while they were factory was down from doing that. Bombardier had previously had a foray into motorcycles. In the late 1960s, they bought Gorelli mini bikes and rebadged them as Bombardier. That only lasted about a year or two and ended in a legal dispute with an importer in the USA. So in 1970, Bombardier decided to make their own motorcycles, design themselves and build them. And it commenced with Laurent Baudin hiring an American called Gary Robinson, who was given the task of building the team to design and help make the bikes. Overall, the story is quite short story. It started in 1970, and in 1987 it concludes. Production started in 1973. And then in 1982, due to elements of the story, they switched production from Valcourt to an alliance with Armstrong Industries here in the UK. And then finally in 1987, they decided to exit the motorcycle industry together. So it's a very short story, but they did achieve some great things. Unfortunately, Bombardier decided to do some other things and exit the industry. What's incredible about this story is that they decided to design and engineer a motorcycle in Valcourt, Quebec. Now, kind of think of Canada in the 1970s. Bombardier had no experience. In fact, there was no experience of motorcycle production anywhere in Canada. And it's fair to say in North America, there is very limited expertise. Harley Davidson existed, and obviously they had expertise, but there were no real other companies in all of North America which were successfully commercially producing motorcycles. You kind of compare that to Europe. Most European countries have one or two companies. The UK is obviously famous for production of its motorcycles. So Valcourt, Quebec, it had no experience. They had no market presence in motorcycles. They had no real expertise. They couldn't go out to a pool of people to get the expertise they needed. And it would be fair to say there was no real motorcycle industry or market. Early 1970s, the idea of motorcycles that were purely for leisure was quite a new idea. Up until then, especially in Europe, motorcycles were largely forms of utility transportation to get back and forth to work. But anyone who's followed the British motorcycle industry, that was all collapsing. Most of the European manufacturers were collapsing in the 1970s because that market had dropped. And the leisure industry of motorcycles, competing, motocross and enduro and leisurely riding hadn't really taken off yet. So it was quite a bold decision to enter the market. They were successful. They did achieve things. They exported the bikes to UK, France, Sweden, Australia, United States. So they got them around the world. But the story is an interesting one. So Gary Robinson joined Bombardier in 1970. And obviously he had no team. So he spent most of 1970 actually gathering the team together to help design and build the motorcycles. Now, he selected a group of people. You can see on the left-hand side there, people like Dave McLean and Bob Fisher and that, who were instrumental in the design. But none of the people that listed had any kind of real expertise in designing motorcycles. They were amateur racers. They were sort of developers of engine tuning and all that. Gary Robinson had never designed a motorcycle before. He had a good reputation in California as someone who could tune engines. And I believe Gary was actually running a camshaft grinding business when he was approached by Bombardier to head up the design team. Other people that you see listed there, Sam Laponte. Sam Laponte was the design director for Bombardier at the time. And Sam went on to have a very distinguished career. He was responsible for all of Bombardier's design right the way through until the change of the millennium, when his own son took over as the design director for BRP, which is pretty incredible because, I can't think of many other companies in the world where, a father and son work for a private company and hold that kind of continuous role. Other notable people there, Scotty Sater and Dennis Mahon were from California. Again, well known for engine tuning. Scotty Sater was well known for designing and building flat track motorcycle frames and all that. Ron Pinoche, heading towards the bottom there, was actually a design graduate who joined the team, and he developed the look for the original team design. So the white gas tank and white fenders with the yellow and orange stripes, that was Ron's handiwork. Ron went on to become professor of design at the University of Alberta, so he had a distinguished career. And finally, Jeff Smith. Jeff Smith was world motocross champion back in the early 1960s for a couple of times, and a very notable rider. But again, Jeff Smith was a rider, not a designer, not an engineer. And they were all in their late 20s, early 30s. None of them had any great experience in industry. Bob Fisher was a graduate in engineering, but had only had a couple of roles before he joined. They were joined by some expertise at Rotax. Dr. Heinz Lippich led the team who developed the original motor. Although Heinz was a doctorate of mechanical engineering, he was actually a notable road racer in Austria and won the Austrian Championship a couple of times. And this team, when they actually got together, went from a blank piece of paper in January 1971 to a working motorcycle by November, which is pretty incredible going, 11 months to fully design, engineer, and build a working motorcycle. And within 16 months, Jeff Smith and Bob Fisher won their first races in them in April 1972. And other incredible things happened even before that. So it's incredible to think, that within 16 months they built a winning motorcycle without the use of any legacy of design. They had no benefit of computer models or IT engineering. This was good old-fashioned paper drafting and good old-fashioned engineering. When I talked to BRP just recently, they said how it takes 10 years now to get a product designed and on the market. So what that little group, and there wasn't very many of them, of fairly amateurs, fairly young people, achieved was fantastic. The prototype they developed in November 1971 didn't really change much. They got the design damn near correct when they first got it done. What they came up with was this. Dave McLean and one of the technicians, Claude Dedeaux, took this out to a gravel pit in November 1971 for the very first ride of the bike, and it worked incredibly well. What you see there is the only two original photographs that exist of the bike. They were taken by Dave McLean. And what was eventually put into production in terms of both the TNT and the MX models was basically that design. Yes, they changed the forks from Beta units to Seriani. They went from the R8AH hub system, which was a UK source supply, to a Bombardier design braking system. But what they came up with in those first 11 months was generally eventually what went into production. Now, it wasn't all plain sailing, because from November 1971, they spent the next 12 months designing and developing the bike, fine-tuning it even more. They spent 12 months in the Las Vegas, Georgia, and Texas area. You know, people like Jeff Smith and Bob Fisher and all that rode bikes. They hired local riders, local good riders to ride the bikes and report on what happened, you know, what failed and all that. How could they improve the design? And it's incredible to think that, you know, the big Bombardier Corporation as we know it today, the picture in the bottom right hand corner of the barn, that was the development building for the bikes. They weren't in Valcourt. They were stuck out on the R&D track on a farm just north of Valcourt, and they had to convert the existing barn into a work facility. That was one of the tasks which Gary Robinson first did in 1970 and 1971, was to design a workspace, design a small workshop where they could build the prototypes, design it. You know, on the left-hand side of the barn was the offices. Upstairs, Gary Robinson had an office, and his secretary had one, and Camille Picard, who was the draftsman and all that. They were up there drawing, and the rest of the R&D team were downstairs. So this was a tiny little group putting this together, and it really, you know, I really cannot give these guys credit enough for what they achieved. But you know, they spent a year. Yes, they had a lot of issues. They broke a lot of parts. They had a lot of failure, but you know, everything was worked through. And obviously, this was back before the time of video calls and emails and all that. So every component that was broken had to be, you know, wrapped up, posted back to Valcourt or Austria if it was a Rotax component, with a possible explanation as to how it broke. But this is what they came up with. You know, they came up with what was eventually called the MX-1. And if you compare the bike there to those original photographs, you can see it didn't really change much. Yes, they had polyurethane fenders and all that. The design of the bike was generally taken from a number of European different models. One particular model they used was the Bultaco. There was a feeling within the team that by using the Bultaco way, which was that it was one frame and that the engine was the same size regardless of its capacity. So the 125, the 175, the 250, the engine is exactly the same size, which allowed for easier production. You know, they only had to make one frame, one component of everything, and just a slightly different engine internals with a slightly different exhaust to reflect the capacity. The innovative adjustable steering head. Those of you who don't know, you can change the fork angle by adjusting a couple of cups in the head. That allowed for different type of models. You know, you could have a faster steering motocross bike and a slightly slower steering road bike. And again, you only had to do make one component. You just had to change the couplings around to adjust the steering head angle. Most of the components were made in-house. You know, the good thing about Bultaco is, Bombardier, is that they had a number of different associated companies who could make the components. You know, it came with electronic ignition from Bosch as part of the system that was developed by Rotax. And they cut down on other ideas. You know, the bikes are originally to have a fully enclosed chain like the Eastern European bikes, like the DKWs and the CZs, but that was all scrapped in favor of easier and quicker production. Final bike was very light. It weighed about a couple 100 pounds and produced about 30 brake horsepower, and very, very easy maintenance. The components on it are universal. It's just M6, M8 bolts, just bought straight off the shelf. Anyone who's ever restored a Japanese bike know that nearly every nut and bolt on a Japanese bike is bespoke. It's fitted. Oh, they're a dreadful nightmare. But on the Can-Ams, they just use standard components. So what they came up with the MX-1, they then had the TNT, which was the road-going version of this bike. Again, same bike, just came with a slightly different exhaust on a couple of different models, and the TNT road version just came with lights. Eventually, they would add the qualifier model, but again, it was generally the same motorcycle. Over the years, they fooled around with the shock angle and the length of the swinging arm and all that, but it was always the same frame and the same factory. It would be fair to say that a lot of the success of the bikes was down to the 244 motor that was developed by Rotax. It was an incredibly well-engineered motor and has really stood the test of time. It's incredible how many of these motors still run. They originally developed a 125 and a 175 and eventually adapted that from the 250 all the way up to 400 cc's, all using the same case and transmission configurations. So any Can-Am, you can go 125 to basically up to 370 or 400 motor, and it will just swap in and out of the frame. A number of other manufacturers, Rotax went on to sell the motor to other European makers. Not as common, people like Portal and Kramer and Kramit and SWM. They have their own loyal following here in Europe, not very well known in North America, but other companies like Aprilia and Puch and Armstrong, a bit known. But what that team, again, the Rotax team developed that in a number of months, and it's incredible. They got it so well designed in that time. Even now, Rotax motor, which is used in all sorts of types of racing, is still very durable and a very good motor. So what did they achieve? They assembled the team in early 71, designed it through 1971, did all the testing through 1972, finally launched production in 1973, in May 1973. And what they did in the first 2 years was just incredible. Not only did they put a bike together that ran, worked, but it was very, very competitive. Lee Robinson, son of Gary Robinson, won the Canadian 125 Junior Motocross Championship on a prototype back in 1972. Jeff Smith, Bill Sharp was and various other riders. Bob Fisher, who was one of the design team, went on to win medals in the 73, 74, and 75 ISDT. Phil Mickelson and Terry Brigham went on to set land speed records, 5 in total, and incredibly they stood for 45 years, those records, before it was only a few years ago that they were actually beaten. Probably the crowning glory was Gary Jones, Jimmy Ellis, and Marty Tripes, winning, first, second, and third in the 1974 Motocross Championships. Jimmy Ellis went on to win various Supercross victories on the Can-Ams, and there are numerous other motocross, enduro, and flat track victories on the bike. So incredible, bike that was designed within 10 months went on to achieve so much. And it's fair to say that this success so early on came to the attention of the big four Japanese motorcycle makers. Japan was trying to enter the motorcycle industry in America in the early 1970s at the same time. Bombardier dominated the snowmobile industry at that time. 85% of the snowmobiles sold in North America in the early 70s were made by Bombardier under the Skidoo range. So the Japanese, be fair to say, were scared. I remember talking to Lee Robinson, son of Gary, and he was telling me that Gary Robinson actually took a phone call from the head of Kawasaki in America, who knew Gary, and told him outright that Kawasaki were hugely concerned that a company the size of Bombardier, who had totally dominated the snowmobile industry, were going to move into the dominate the snowmobile industry, move into the motorcycle industry, and had achieved so much in a relatively short space of time. But more about that later. Very, very small team dedicated to achieving what was done. There is the team, the R&D team. There's only about 30 of them. If you take away the three factory riders at the front and their representatives. This picture has been around for a long time, and I've been working with a number of the original R&D team to try to help identify who is in the picture. We know most of them, but there are 3 or 4 names that we are still struggling to find. Some of the original machinists, unfortunately, people remember them, but after about 50 years, names are starting to become a bit more difficult to remember. So if anyone is watching this and can recognize anyone, I would love to hear from you if you can help identify anyone in this picture. This picture was taken at the R&D Center just outside Valcourt, and was actually taken from the first floor of the barn, looking down just after Gary, Jimmy, and Marty had won the motocross championships, and hence the 1, 2, 3 on the bikes. So from 1973, in the initial launch of the MX and the TNT, Bombardier did not stop there. They had very, very ambitious plans. They developed working models of trail bikes, enduro bikes, road racers, flat track motorcycles. They were going to go full steam into the motorcycle industry. 2 predominant photographs there. The road bike, Can-Am fully designed a 500cc parallel twin bike. It was done by 2 guys called Bob Barker and Ken Roseveare. And it got all the way up to production. They were just about to put it into production, and Bombardier decided to draw from the market. The photograph of the military, just below that, is from the UK military. One of the biggest models that Bombardier built was that they took the 250 TNT model and made a military model out of it, and sold about 3,500 units to the UK military. Both the Belgium and the Canadian military also bought a number of bikes. So you can't knock Bombardier at the time for having a considerable plan and ambition to do different things. They even went into the four-stroke market. They developed a bike called the Sonic. The green bike down in the bottom of the corner was one of the original prototypes, known as the Sabre. And they were going to go into it. You know, they even had their own clothing range, which I own a number of components to. So it wasn't just, you know, the little white tank bikes. They produced a number of things over the years that they were in production. And it's a true Canadian story for success as well. You know, not only did people like Jeff Smith, you know, who was with Can-Am, ride for them, but a lot of the big names in Canadian motorcycles were also sponsored by Can-Am, had the rides and whatsoever. You know, big names like Ross Pedersen, Ronnie Matthews, Bill Sharples, Blair Sharples. And in fact, the Sharples family is an incredible story associated with Can-Am. Bill Sharples, the father, owned Sonic motorcycles in Oakville. And he was a Can-Am dealer. He rode for Can-Am. He rode in the 1973 ISDT down in the USA. Unfortunately, just after that, that's when the arthritis in Bill's hands became a bit too much. So he largely gave up riding then. But, you know, his son Blair Sharples had incredible success on Can-Ams, as did his brother Todd and his sister Tony, who achieved flat track championships, racing Can-Am framed, Rotax engined flat track motorcycles. Ross Pedersen rode for a number of years and had a number of victories on them, and so did Ronnie Matthews. Ronnie Matthews, pictured there, was at the 1980 Briode ISDE in France when he the Sabre motorcycle. So not only did Can-Am produce motorcycles, but it also helped to produce a number of key Canadian riders as well. There are some others listed there as well. So what happened? You know, at this part of the story, you know, had the victories, they had the bikes, they had the models, they had the riders. But what happened? Well, it's fair to say that Bombardier could not convert the success they achieved in the victories and the racing into actual bike sales. And they couldn't do it very early on. You know, in 1976, Can-Am didn't actually produce any motorcycles because they had so much unsold inventory from the previous years. They just could not afford to produce any bikes that year. Incredible. And that's only 2 or 3 years after they started. They couldn't sell that bike. You know, this little picture comes from the UK. Can-Ams were officially imported into the UK from 1979, but they were importing 1974 and 1975 TNTs, you know, old qualifiers from 1977. They were bringing in old stock into the UK just to try to sell it at fairly prices. And I've got a whole host of very similar ads like this from 75, 76, from dealers selling the bikes at 50% off this price, just trying to sell them. So unfortunately, you know, Bombardier at the end of 76 decided they were going to slow down on investment. And in 1982, they decided to exit the motorcycle industry themselves. Now, Jeff Smith, in a last-ditch attempt to try to keep the brand going, made a deal with Armstrong to import Armstrong motorcycles into North America, the American and Canadian markets, rebadge them as Can-Ams, and to try to get the brand to go on that. It was a good idea. Armstrong had more up-to-date designs, based upon on monoshocks and disc brakes and all that. Armstrong had already set up a deal with Rotax to install Rotax engines in all of their bikes. So it seemed like a good idea. But again, they struggled to sell the bikes. And in 1987, Can-Am decided to exit the motorcycle industry altogether, which caused the Armstrong company to collapse. And Alan Clues, who is famous for CCM motorcycles, ended up buying the remaining assets. So the official reason given by Bombardier as to why they decided to exit the motorcycle industry is down to the California Clean Air Act. This act, which was implemented in California, basically made it difficult to make stroke motorcycles. That's the official reason given by Bombardier. Unfortunately, it doesn't make a lot of sense. The California Clean Air Act does not apply to off-road motorcycles. Therefore, Can-Ams were going to be largely exempt from it. And if you think of the heyday of two-stroke motorcycles, the Kawasaki triples, the Yamaha RDs, the Suzuki GTs, all of that happened in the late 70s and early 80s after the California Clean Air Act came into place. So unfortunately, that reason doesn't really hold water very well. But it is also true that Bombardier decided to move more into mainstream transportation, in particular trains, and really wanted the factory space and the investment and the workforce to really work on trains. And if you look at the Bombardier Corporation now, who are into planes, trains, all sorts of things. They went on to become successful. There are a couple of other reasons which didn't help. Obviously, a lot of the components had to be put in from abroad. In the 1970s, the Canadian dollar was fairly weak, so it made the bikes very expensive to make and sell. And I think it'd be fair to say that the sales targets set by Bombardier were very, very ambitious. They didn't seem to be able to attract the same level of market that they did with the Skidoos. They really expected to sell 500,000 bikes a year as they did snowmobiles, but yeah, I don't think the market was really there at that time. However, if you do think about it, the U.S. motorcycle sales were 1.5 million units in 1973. So, if you think that Bombardier had dominated the snowmobile industry by 85% to sell 450,000 units. If they got a third of the market in 1973, they could have achieved that. However, I think it's fair to say that they just did not understand the motorcycle industry in such depth. And it would be also fair to say they didn't actually understand the Japanese form of business and the other manufacturers. There is a Japanese business strategy known as Keiretsu, which is when competitors join forces to dominate a market. And if you look at the way how the Japanese have dominated the automotive market and the motorcycle market as well, you can see that that's kind of what was going to happen. But I would also like to provide another explanation and to show what the Japanese were actually very capable of doing. This magazine called Motor Journal is a French language motorcycle magazine published in Montreal, so about 100 miles just up the road from Valcourt. And this is the September 1974 issue. So this is the month when Gary, Jimmy, and Marty won the American motocross market. And you would have thought French language newspaper dedicated to motorcycles. This is where Can-Am would be advertising. There is not a single advertisement in here for Can-Am, and it's just amazing. Then when you look at what was in there, the back cover of the magazine is an advert for Yamaha motorcycles. The inside cover is an advertisement for Suzuki motorcycles. The center spread is for Kawasaki motorcycles. And another center spread is for Honda motorcycles. All full color, all full ads. And if you look at any of the other motorcycle magazines in the 1970s, it's the same thing. It's very, very hard to find an ad for Can-Ams, but you come up with these full-size motorcycle adverts for the Japanese brands. And it's interesting to notice the difference. Can-Am ads were always very technical. You could win an enduro on a Can-Am, or you could win a motocross race. The Japanese were selling a lifestyle. They were saying, buy a Japanese motorcycle, you can get a pretty girl. On a similar thing, Tony Murphy, who was the technical editor of Cycle Magazine back in the early 1970s, he told me once that if you phoned up a Japanese motorcycle manufacturer and wanted to test ride a bike, the Japanese brands would actually give you a motorcycle. Can-Am would lend you one for an hour or two, but only after you made several phone calls. So if you were a journalist writing about motorcycles, what would you rather write about? The company that gives you motorcycles, or the company that you have to phone several times and they'll lend you a motorcycle for an hour? So it's fair to say that the Japanese really outmarketed Can-Am, both from a domination of the trade press, but also through to understanding that the motorcycle industry was entering the leisure on the side, and they focused on that leisure and stuff. But after 1987, obviously the brand remained dominant or dormant until about 2007, when Bombardier revitalized it and started to apply it to the range of ATVs, which they were then making, side-by-side ATVs. And it was fantastic to see just a couple of months ago, in late 2022, when Can-Am officially announced they were going to re-enter the two-wheel motorcycle industry with a range of electric bikes, which are due out in 2024. And they can currently be seen, or certainly some working prototypes can be seen in some of the motorcycle shows, both in Europe and North America, where they're being circulated. So the brand is not dead. and it looks like it's going to be making a comeback in the next year or so under the guise of an electric bike. As we come to the end of my talk, I would like to say a special note to Dave McLean, who was one of the original technicians involved with designing the bike. Dave took a number of photographs which have been used in this presentation. The only reason why Dave took the photographs is he was the only one with a camera, Bombardier at the time. And Dave has apologized to me because at that time he could only afford one roll of film a year. So he only took a few photographs. But if you are interested in the actual detail of how the bikes came about and were designed and all that, there is a fantastic 7-part series written by Dave, which I've got on the website. Just follow the link. It's a great story by Dave when he describes a lot of the detail that went into designing the bikes and a lot of the issues and problems they had to overcome to make it successful. So I'm indebted to Dave McLean for writing that story. It's a fantastic read. And then finally, to finish off, as 2023 is the 50th anniversary of launch of Can-Am's, BRP are doing a commemorative publication, which should be out in the summer. There is a 50th anniversary festival in Gopher Dunes, Ontario, from the 17th to the 20th of August. We're being sponsored by Can-Am. A lot of the original factory racers are coming. A lot of the original design team there, as I will be. So I hope to see everyone there. And there are a couple of other further announcements that will be coming out shortly about a couple of other special events to help celebrate the 50th anniversary. So thank you very much. I appreciate that was a very quick romp through the history of Can-Am and was a very short and edited version. But thank you for listening. It's a story that has many twists and turns, and the website I run does contain a lot of information. So thank you for listening, and hopefully we will meet again at one of the upcoming events. Or please, if you have any questions or queries, more than happy to hear from you via the website or via
Clark, one of our regulars, hi Clark, wants to know if Bombardier moving into the business of making the Sea-Doo had any impact on their pulling out of the business of motorbikes.
Yes, it would be fair to say that the Sea-Doo proved a lot more profitable and successful than the original motorcycles did. They were able to dominate the sort of jet ski in the early days, which they did with the motorcycles. It also coincided with their established dealership network for the snowmobiles, because those snowmobile dealers had a tendency to be sort of more situated in the cottage country. Therefore, it was a very nice product to slit in with those dealers' other offerings for boats and cottage type products.
A question from Rhythm, and I actually had a question of my own that I will append to this one. So when they dropped production, was there any attempt to, in-house to even look at a redesigned version that met with, whatever environmental regulations? And as an extension of that, what happened to that in-house team? Did they stay at Bombardier, the sort of dream team of motorcycle builders?
So the first part, generally, I think the California Clean Act, the impact of the legislation, I think was probably more of a convenience for Bombardier to exit the motorcycle industry. I think it hadn't proved successful as they thought, and this demanded a further amount of investment, which they decided not to undertake. But as I say, when you look at the expertise that was involved with road tax, all the other manufacturers addressed it. So I find it difficult to believe that that they didn't have the expertise there to develop it up. Yes, some of the team stayed with Bombardier to do other things. People like Jeff Burgess, who joined the team in '76, ended up going on to become the engineering director of Bombardier. Sam LaPonte, retired from BRP, and his son took over. Other people like some of the original team, when the announcement was made in '76, they left. Gary Robinson left in '76, and a lot of the other original team left about that point as well.
Okay.
Great. So thanks so much, Chris, for joining us and working through the technical details here. So we'll obviously be in touch as we continue with the 50th anniversary of the Can-Am. Hopefully we can work with you a little bit more on that, and
Yep.
as we publicize our Can-Am in our collection as we learn more about it. And any last comments you'd like to make about the Can-Am before we let you go for the day?
No, I've just always enjoyed the story because it's a great little Canadian success story, and I have to emphasize again that that this was a team which really had no expertise in the making of a motorcycle, and what they did within the time frame they were given and the constraints they were given, and working in that little barn outside Montreal was just incredible. It's fair dues to them. They produced a very competitive motorcycle, and it's still competitive today. In vintage racing and all that. Can-Ams are a very competitive bike. So well done, that original design team.
Great. So if there's any other questions, we'll pass them along. Could we just clarify the photo of all the unknowns that you had all the numbers on? Do you know
Yep.
what the year that was?
That
Some
was
context.
taken, I believe, in about September '84, or
Okay.
maybe a little bit later, because the 1, 2, 3 in front is Gary Jones, Jimmy Ellis, and Marty Tripes, who finished the '74 motocross American Motocross Championships in first, second, and third, and they're there with Gary Jones's, and I believe it's Jimmy Ellis's father there. So a lot of the people that we don't know were on the sort of technician side. They were the welders and the machinists who were working with the engineers to develop the actual components. And unfortunately, we're trying to track those names down just so we have a full record and full recognition of who is there.
Great. Okay, well, let's leave it there for today. And if you have any other questions, we'll forward them on to you, Chris. And we look forward to seeing everyone on April 20th. And we're going to be talking about a totally different topic. We'll be talking about Canadian-built steam cars back in the 1920s. So more Canadian content to come. And then in May, if you want to join in, we're talking about cars of the Maritimes. So we're headed east to talk about that topic. So always something to learn about. And Chris, we appreciate you joining us today, taking your afternoon to speak with our enthusiastic membership. And most people stayed the whole time, so you kept everyone interested. So we'll be in touch. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next month.
Right. Thank you very much. Bye.
Take care, everyone.